You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Welcome to TFM's local books and comic show. Just so excited to be here. It's a big week this week, and of course, I couldn't do this alone, and so I have with me the beautiful, brilliant Bruce Gibson.
Hello, I am beautiful and brilliant and good to be here.
Yes, it is good to be here. I mean, especially since we have so much to talk about this week and some really cool things to talk about. And you're going to be helping me look at a couple of comics we've got that have come out. We've got Mir War Zero, as well as the very last issue of Year 5. And before we get there, of course, just want to say thank you so much to everyone who is listening. If you like literary treks, please give us a star rating and review over there on Apple Podcasts. It really does help people find the show. We'll read your review out in the show if you give us one. Of course, make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcast so you get the show as soon as it drops. You can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the listeners only discussion group you can join over on Facebook called the Babel Conference, which you can join listeners from all over the world and discuss all the shows we're doing there. You can also find us online at Trek.fm and see all the things that are going on. We've got so many new things that are going on right now, so you definitely encourage you to check that out. And if you want to send us an email, go over to Trek.fm/contact. Choose a show, choose Literary Treks, and that comes to us here. And also, want to say a huge thank you to our associate producers here through Patreon. We've got some great gentlemen, Greg Rosier and Casey Pettit. We want to thank you so much for supporting us here on the network. And if you like the network and want to make sure that great content keeps coming to you, go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of the team. So, Bruce, I'm really interested in this not Year Zero, this Mir War Zero issue. And this follows up some of the other Mir content that they've done. I think the last thing they did was Terra Incognita. Yes. And so this actually follows that up. And we're basically kind of introducing, I guess, much of what's going to kind of happen in this series. But as basically an introductory issue, what did you think of it?
I thought it was a good introduction because it picks up where we left off with the previous series and with, spoiler alert, with Reg Barkley. And so I thought it did a good transition into establishing where this TNG Mir crew is and what they're having to face with. And it's setting up things I could tell that if you haven't read the past series, it's letting you know that they basically stole the Enterprise and then they're allowed to keep the Enterprise, and that they had tried to steal the Prime Universe Enterprise and Reg Barkley stayed behind. So it was good at establishing and setting all that up.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, the biggest takeaway I took from this is that this looks nothing like Picard.
Well, I was going to mention that later. Well, looks aren't everything, But you're right. A friend of the show, before I even read this, tweeted or messaged me and said, Picard doesn't look like Picard in this. I think everybody else, for the most part, does. But yeah, Picard looks very odd.
He does. He really... he feels like a really bad version of like the Mandarin or something from the old Marvel comics. I don't know. He just doesn't look right at all. I think, like you said, this issue does do just a good job of kind of setting things up. And, I think one of the most fun things about the Mirror Universe is the opportunity to just play around with everyone in really different ways. Having Deanna Troi be the Inquisitor on the ship, which is really cool. I love that. Riker has a really nice goatee, beard with he's grown it out. They've braided two sides of his goatee area. It's very, very nice. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'm really interested now just to see where it goes. There isn't a ton with this issue. I feel like, in all honesty, it goes really fast. And I also would have liked a little bit more setup for it, because I do feel as though it doesn't quite do a good enough job of helping people who may not have read all the previous Mirror comics really kind of know what's going on as well as it could have. And so, and the reason I say that is obviously, like the books, right? They always try to make sure that you have a good reference point. So if they reference a point of something that's happened in a previous novel, they give you kind of a short summary, basically. I know some fans hate that, but you always have to be cognizant of the people who may never have read these and just pick up an issue, and so to me, I did feel like, because it's been so long since I've read any of those Mirror comics, I would have liked a little bit more, I guess, backstory.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, there's still a lot of backstory that this doesn't address. I just assume that what they do give us in this is the backstory that we need to know for this series going forward. That, the rest of the stuff that maybe we got in the previous comics either doesn't have any impact on what we're going to read in this series, or they'll give us some backstory on that when we get to the other issues. But to your point, I mean, it is a 0 issue, right? So I guess it's just kind of a light story, just kind of putting the chess pieces in its place and just getting it started. I mean, I kind of liked it. I enjoyed it. And Picard doesn't look like Patrick Stewart. I just assumed that the artist just was probably frustrated and said, I just cannot do Patrick Stewart. But that's fine. Yeah, I mean, know who he is.
Overall, I mean, I would say I'm mildly interested to see where this goes. The one thing that I came away with was that I didn't feel like it really grabbed me.
Right. No, I agree with that. I mean, first of all, when they showed the Vulcan, I thought, the Vulcan I thought was a Romulan. So that confused me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. The only thing that would grabbed me was this assassinator that went after Picard on the ship. Who is that dude? That was the only thing that really grabbed me.
Yeah, great point. Great point. So, we turn next to the final issue there of year 5, and this is definitely very much a wrap-up issue, where it's kind of an epilogue, mainly to the entire series that's happened here. And I really am interested to know what you think of this, because there's some parts that I felt like I really enjoyed, and then other parts that just felt like, why wasn't there more of the rest of the... why hadn't the story been continued into this so that this really felt like an awesome finale? Because to me, it just felt like they're trying too hard to tie into the motion picture in a way that's not necessarily needed here. because that's done so many other places, and really I would just rather have a good wrap-up to the Year 5 series as a whole.
Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of what we just discussed about the Zero issue.
Mm-hmm.
This issue is the end of a series, and in the same manner, it just kind of feels as if it's just setting the pieces in place as to show us where people are at the end of the Year 5 series, right? So, we get a little bit of Bright Eyes and see that he's working, with the Tholians to mend things with the Federation and rebuild the world, and he's working with Admiral Kirk, and what else do we expect to hear from Admiral Kirk? That this is probably just going to be a temporary thing, that he's doing. And Spock, of course, he wants to leave and do Kolinahr. What I found interesting and a bit confusing at first was Chekhov, Uhura, and Sulu, because we see them tied up.
That made absolutely no sense.
I don't really get it. It's like,
well, and it wasn't even Uhura. It was.
Oh no, that's right. Was it?
Yeah, they're
Susan
implying
Lane.
that it's the woman that he'll have his daughter with.
Right. Yeah, Sulu's daughter with. Yeah, that has Demora. Yeah, so it's the three of them. Yeah, it's not Uhura, but that was a little weird to me because I was like, wait, they've taken they're prisoners from Russians, and they don't feel like Chekhov has done enough to represent the Russians, and the Russians are treated differently on
Have they ever watched the original series?
But then it's like, oh, I guess it was just a test, or like they were just messing around or something. I don't know. I was a bit confused.
I have no idea.
Because they're all like sitting around
really
having
weird.
drinks afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was weird. And then we have McCoy, being called to duty, and he's basically like, nope, I know a good nurse that would like to be a doctor. It's like, okay. So that was real brief. My favorite part was seeing Uhura and Scotty kind of being flirtatious with each other, because it was like, tying to Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Yep. And actually the art is pretty good too. I kind of enjoyed that piece.
I 100% agree with you. It's strange that probably for most fans that be the way that I feel, but I think it was fantastic, kind of showing how, she said, look, with all that we've been through, I've basically learned to not take anything for granted. And I've always enjoyed working with you. And basically she's like, yeah, and I'd really like us to be more, so I'm on leave for the next 3 days. And so call me maybe,
Right. And then Scotty's looking at the Enterprise and he's just like, oh God, you might have some competition.
Yeah, I mean, it was really cute, and I do absolutely think that was the best part of this issue. I mean, it was kind of interesting, I guess, to see Kirk and Bright Eyes working towards the treaty with the Tholians and the Federation, and kind of in many ways, kind of answering why we never see the Tholians again as a problem. Right, we never will run into them. So that part was not bad, but I just felt like except for the Uhura and Scotty piece, the rest of this you could have done. You didn't need any of that, honestly. Really, I would have liked a much more. I would have liked even just more on the story with Kirk and Bright Eyes, like something. But this just felt a little bit like a letdown.
Yeah, but to your point, when you started off, you did say an epilogue, and it really does feel like an epilogue. It's just and here's the happy ending after it ended, and this is where everybody is. It's the love letter. It's like Star Trek Enterprise, had a love letter at the end.
Well, yeah, I guess all in all, not a terrible end to the series, and that series is now wrapped up, and so it'll be very interesting to see what they do next in comics. But Bruce, I mean, we've got a massive interview coming up with Dayton in his new book, Moments Asunder. So why don't we hop to another Coda?
Perfect.
Well, Dayton Ward is here to talk about his latest book, Star Trek Coda, Moments Asunder. And Dayton, I'm just really excited that you are here to be able to finally talk about this series.
Well, thanks for having me back. It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has. It has. And I can't think really of, a bigger book to be talking about. I would just say, the end is near, or is it? And for those who maybe, don't read the acknowledgments and, especially you wrote a pretty cool end to the book where you kind of explained a little bit of where this came from. But I'd love for you to be able to kind of just lay out, the genesis of this story. And how did you guys figure out who was going to write what part?
Well, okay. So, this book contains an afterword, which is the first time I've ever done that, because I felt it was warranted, or we all felt it was warranted to have something like that in each of our books. So the genesis of the story, first of all, we have to go back to the beginning.
It's a very good place to start.
Usually the best place to start. After the 24th century TV shows, DS9, Voyager, Next Gen had wrapped, and the films from Next Gen had wrapped. Shortly after the series finale for DS9, Pocket Books began publishing Deep Space Nine novels that took the characters and situations beyond what you saw on TV. Relatively unprecedented in this regard. I mean, there had been Next Gen novels all through the all through the time that the show was being produced, and same with DS9. But now that the show was no longer being produced and wasn't getting a follow-on feature film the way Next Gen had, the reins were loosened, so to speak, as far as people like me, tie-in writers who were writing these novels for Simon & Schuster. And over time, as the shows got further in the rearview mirror, and there didn't appear like there were going to be any more 24th century Star Trek, licensing and the folks at CBS, or then it was CBS Consumer Products at the time, they just kind of let the novels at Simon & Schuster keep going. So the characters evolved and they moved to different situations, or they had unfortunate fates, and then they got better, and all these big events and all these big shakeups that could never have happened while the series was being produced.
Right.
And so it just sort of grew and evolved and sort of took on a life of its own. So next thing you know, Voyager has follow-on novels after its season finale. And then you have, stuff like Star Trek New Frontier and the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, which are all spin-off series from those. And even after the films for Next Gen, those characters are being pushed in different directions. And we were kind of allowed free reign within reason. I mean, there were a few things they preferred we not do, but for the most part, they were very accommodating. They being CBS Consumer Products and our editors at Simon & Schuster, who were actually acting sort of like showrunners in a writer's room on a TV show at this point.
Right.
They're overseeing all the different books and all the different writers and all the different projects. Because, we're never going to see Captain Picard on TV again. Never going to revisit the Next Generation cast. But, as I have learned over the course of many years doing this, you never say never.
Yeah.
And
it's so true.
So lo and behold, we flash forward to early 2018 when I get a call from Kirsten Beyer, who is, of course, at this point in time working on Star Trek Discovery. And she tells me that they are in talks with Patrick Stewart to return to TV as Captain Picard, in some sort of storyline that would take place 20 odd years after we last saw him, which was in Star Trek Nemesis. So immediately my head went, well, that could be a problem for the books, but I didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about the show or what direction it might take. And things progressed very slowly over that point. And by the time it had been formally announced and there was a writer's room and they were in pre-production for the first season, that's when I got to start seeing information from the writer's room. So I got to see a document that Kirsten had put together sort of as a primer for new writers to the show that highlighted all the really cool high points from Star Trek history, but also included backstory elements that they were creating to inform Picard's first season. So I had all the information about the Mars attack and all the other things that led up to, the current status quo when the show begins in 2399. So when the Mars attack is being talked about in 2385, I'm doing the math. And of course, it only takes, I'm like, well, we're in 2386 plus now in the books, which means this huge, paradigm shifting event in Starfleet's history is behind us somewhere. So we are already at odds with what they are going to establish on screen. And that's when the serious talks began. I started taking a lot of notes. At the same time, David Mack was doing the same thing. We were doing it independently. And then we teamed up we finally got a hold of each other at the Shore Leave Convention in Baltimore in 2019, the summer of 2019. And we talked at length about, what this might mean for the books. And we had already been told by the folks at CBS Licensing and by our editors that they really wanted to do something to align the books with what was to be on the new show. We had no idea what that might be or what form it might take, but what we did not want to do was just simply flip a switch and then all that stuff is, left hanging and we move on to the paradigm. So that's the genesis.
And I loved how you talked about in the afterword, obviously you didn't want to go the whole Star Wars route with what they did, where it becomes Legends and people just feel cheated in many ways and really frustrated because, and part of that, I think the reality is, and I love that they recognize this at CBS, is people have invested so much time in this and they seem to actually care that the fans have invested so much time in this because, for many people, this is the Picard that we know. And the rest of the characters from the 24th century, just as, in Star Wars, that was the Luke Skywalker and the Han Solo and all those characters that we knew for 20 some odd years. And it's very difficult when you've been a fan and you already love those characters, then you invest that time to just see all of that mean nothing. And so I love that CBS is allowing you guys to play in this universe and be able to find a way to bring it in line with what they're doing with Picard without it seeming meaningless.
Well, that's our goal. And that was the thinking, was we wanted to avoid the Star Wars Legends situation. I can't confess to being a huge novel or a Star Wars novel reader, but I've read enough of them over the years.
Sure.
And, their fan base is very passionate and very, very, loyal to those expanded media platforms, just like Star Trek fans are. And what we probably have, it's not a perfect parallel because, Star Wars had the situation where there were levels of canon and they told people, or that, they put forth the notion that the novels and the comics and the games and all the other narrative media that was not on screen were some form of canon. And Star Trek has always been very upfront about what is and is not canon. We didn't necessarily have the same, chopper blade to walk into that the Star Wars novelists did.
It's true.
But that said, despite the fact that they are officially blessed but not canon, there's a very hardcore loyal readership. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to try to do something to do exactly what you said, which was to have them come away with the idea that money and that time and that effort was not wasted, that these stories exist, they continue to exist, they matter. But at the same time, we knew that as soon as we started talking about something like this, it was going to attract attention from people who don't typically read Star Trek novels. And so now the challenge is also try to do something with this narrative and transition over to the lane that the shows occupy, but at the same time be an on-ramp for people who might have never read a Star Trek novel before, and they're coming to check what the fuss is all about. So it's an interesting line to walk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that, obviously within the story, creating the timeline at the beginning to kind of give people all of the major bullet points of really important storylines that most likely are going to have, you guys are going to be pulling from specifically, but to catch those type of readers up, and you always have to be paying attention to those. And I think that's really smart because, you do want to even introduce people to want to go back to read those books, just like, Star Wars still prints the Legends books. They want them reading those. CBS wants people to go back and read those stories. And again, doing it this way legitimizes going back and reading those stories in many ways too. So I think all in all, it makes it for just a really, it makes it the best of both worlds,
Ooh, that's okay. Yeah. I mean, that was our thinking was, we want, if we did our jobs right, they're going to want to go back and read all those stories that inform Coda. And, and plus there's also the very real, challenge of, okay, we are doing, we're transitioning this continuity, and hopefully doing it in a way that doesn't irritate people to the point where, because we also have to invite them to stay on the ride because we have, there will be books coming, that tie into the new shows. And we don't know what direction, Next Generation or any of the other classic series will take in novel form. I suspect there will be, certain, I can't imagine a world where they're not producing new original series novel. I don't even think that reality exists. And if it does, then it needs to be addressed because that's a crime. But the same thing, with the popular classic series, they're always going to be there, and they're going to be there with an opportunity to tell more stories in those settings.
Sure. Well, and I mean, within the Picard timeline era, you've got all of these characters that exist. And so trying to figure out then, what characters is that show ever going to touch? Will they ever touch, and because the 21st century is so vast with the amount of characters to which, you can pull from. So, I think that definitely makes for, a lot of ability for books to be able to dig into that. And so 100%, I'm right there with you. Obviously you and James and David are writing these stories here, and you got book one. How did you all make that decision? I mean, was it like, if you're going to bring a whole universe to an end, David has to do that because then he has the largest kill count ever?
We all agreed. The three of us agreed that Dave should be the third book. This is his thing. These kinds of high stake plots with just everybody getting blown up or destroyed, or at least maybe they are, maybe they're not. But I mean, this is a grand stage, and there was no argument or fussing about the batting order. The only reason, I think the primary reason I ended up drawing book one was because of Jim's schedule. I could have very easily been book two. I mean, it just came down to a scheduling thing. But once we had the batting order, we developed the story for all three books together. I mean, we figured it out from front to back. So we figured out which beats were going to be in which book and which characters were going to be focused on in which book and how we were going to feed, 1 to 2 to 3. Everything was talked about in terms of that, figuring out, where on the board the pieces are going to start and move to and all that kind of thing. So it's very much a collaboration on all three books. So the batting order is important because, like I said, I think nobody can close out a story quite like Dave. And I don't think anybody can make that second half twist quite like Jim. So it really does, I think, work. I think the batting order is fine. I mean, I would be very intimidated if I had gotten the third straw for this one. I've done cleanup on a couple of series before, and it's hard. It's very hard.
Yeah, because you did Peaceable Kingdoms. I mean, you brought the whole fall series to a close. So yeah, I mean and that's always a difficult thing. Is like, how do you find the right resolution, yet enough open plot lines, all that. So absolutely.
Yeah. It was an interesting, it was a very intense collaboration, but as I said, somewhere else, it was for all the right reasons. I mean, we were just all very heavily invested in doing this right.
Quick question on that then, with the collaboration, you mentioned you and Dave had gotten together at Shore Leave and talked through things in 2019. What did that look like? Did you guys get a chance? I mean, obviously COVID happened. Did you guys just spend a lot of time on Zoom with each other? Or, I mean, how did that end up working for y'all to collaborate? And
we had a, I don't know if it was quite weekly, but it was fairly close to weekly Skype call. between the three of us, and backed up by emails as we all went to our corners and thought about this, that, and the other. Before we even started writing outlines, we were making notes. We were doing some research. We were trying to figure out which plot lines were still available. Who was that sort of thing. So yeah, there were a number of Skype calls over several months. As our various schedules allowed, because we were all working on other things at the same time. So it was just basically fitting it in and around everything else.
I kind of want to just ask, as an author, you've been a part of, Star Trek literature for so long, but this may be the biggest thing you've ever done. And what is it like, just as an author, to be the one who starts off something this big?
It's absolutely terrifying. I say that with a laugh, but it really is. It's a little nerve wracking. We knew that the stakes were a little higher this time around, and a lot more eyeballs than normal would be on us. Even if we're not talking about people who read the books. I've seen articles about the trilogy in places that I very rarely, if ever, see any coverage of Star Trek novels.
Yeah.
So
same here.
There's a casual interest there, that's building on the fringes that we just don't typically see. So I'm like, okay, people are paying attention. So, we're kind of, the pressure's on to kind of stick the landing. And maybe there are people who are watching it, for the train wreck factor. Like, well, let's just watch this entire thing blow up and laugh. It's very possible there's just people out there doing that. And so I don't know. It's a little stressful. Because we take it, I guess taking it personal sounds weird, but there's a lot of investment. The readers have invested all this time and money, but we've invested a lot of time and effort to build this universe. So it's, I don't know. It's a very weird place to be in.
Well, in so many ways, like you talked about at the very beginning, when they weren't planning and it never seems like they were going to touch the 24th century again. In many ways, you all became the showrunners of these characters' lives, and then they've been in your hands for a very long time. And so I can understand completely why this would be personal to you, because you're also fans yourselves, And so, that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question, is just because, like, I having also spent time with all of you as well, I know how much this means to you just as a fan to be able to get to do this. And I think that's something that is really special and has made this special. And I can feel it from you guys when we talk, and I could feel it in the writing of the books. And so I think, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want people who are listening to this interview or read the books forget that this means something to you guys too. This is not just a paycheck.
Yeah, and you raise another point that it's not just the readers that we're concerned about. It's not even the casual looky-loos that we're worried about. We're also worried about, the other writers who have contributed to all of this over so many years. I view it as a big responsibility, and I know Dave and Jim feel the same way. Like I said, it's a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and I think, I guess I would be worried too if you didn't feel that way. I think that also just shows the legitimacy of the way you guys feel about this and how seriously you take it. And so I think, to me, that's comforting that you feel that pressure. So
these have never been. I've never written a Star Trek novel just for the paycheck. That's not a reason to write any book, let alone something like this, which means a great deal to so many people, and it means a great deal to me. I've been a fan since I was, practically out of diapers. But yeah, this, like I said, there was a little bit more of that this time around. There was a little bit more. Felt like there was a heightened responsibility this time around.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm really interested in, and I obviously know that there will be things that you can't go into with this question, but the Davidians and using the aliens from Time's Arrow, and their plan is fascinating. And in many ways, I've heard references like, Crisis on Infinite Earths, or on infinite universes, really. I after kind of getting to what their plan is, I was like, man, this feels like the James Bond motto, except for it's the universes are not enough, where they want complete consumption for their own benefit, except they don't really seem to have any lives. So I'm fascinated, like, as you guys are trying to figure out this story, where does it come from to, like, this is the right alien species to use, especially in this first book?
Well, I mean, we were looking for a threat. We were looking for something that could pose a threat on such a scale, based on on what we had to do with the books. There's, and we also we liked the Davidians because we felt that they possessed those qualities that could bring a threat of this scale, but they also hadn't been used, hardly at all. I mean, I think they may have popped up in the odd storyline somewhere in a comic or maybe perhaps another novel, but I don't recall. I don't remember finding anything of any real significance. So really, they haven't been seen since Time's Arrow. And what we saw was just a very small slice of what they did. It was very focused on 19th century Earth. So we're like, well, what if this is expanded by orders of magnitude? So that was where the conversation took us. And we were motivated by the idea of finding a threat that could, be on that scale. There aren't that many of them in Star Trek, and we didn't want to invent something whole cloth that we would have to, it was more fun to reach back into the mythos and find something that hadn't been tapped in quite a while. And as far as I can tell, nobody guessed the Davidians coming, from what I can tell by reactions that I've seen to book one. I haven't gone digging, but at least what crosses my feed on social media, I don't think anybody saw the Davidians coming. So that part worked out for us. As far as what's coming, what else is their plan? Man, wait for book 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I see, obviously too, I mean, I don't really feel like, and especially from talking to Kirsten after her end run there, that the Krunum aren't really out of the game yet as well. I mean, there's so many different layers that this can go, and I think that's what makes it exciting. It's like, this feels like boss level 1. Now I'm just waiting for boss level 2, possibly. Yeah.
As I said to somebody, because they had hit me on Facebook or something, and they said that the book left me drained. I'm worn out, but I'm ready for book 2 and book 3. Yeah. I'm like, I want you to understand something, that book 1 is arguably the lowest intensity setting in the story. It's sort of like a roller coaster ride. It's like I'm the uphill climb with 1 or 2 really crazy turns at the beginning of the ride, but there's all this track is still out there, waiting for you. All those loops. So you're
saying this was setting 1 in the agony booth?
Pretty much, yeah. Okay. I think so. Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe I managed to push it to 3, but maybe 4. I don't know, but it's kind of hard. I mean, somebody tried to hang the Dr. Death moniker on me, and I'm like, that's still Dave. Dave is still the king of that kind of thing.
Seriously, yeah.
And but for me, I guess for me, it's definitely outside what I normally tend to do in Star Trek. Now, I don't tend to wreak that much havoc. I don't kill that many people. It's just generally not in the stories that I tell, but we all had to kind of up our game a little bit this time around.
Yeah. And one of the things that I did like about the Davidians is a race to use here too. And especially their plan is that, there is something scary about this idea of, complete consumption of everything, with there being no real joy to, like the Borg, at least they're trying to add the biological and technological distinctiveness to their own for perfection. They're looking for perfection, right? Like there's this unsatiable desire for the Davidians that can never be satiated. Right? It's never enough. And I think there's something terrifying about that. And reflectively, I was just thinking about, thematically, that that is the exact opposite of everything that, Starfleet and the Federation have also stood for, which is to be able to give people the ability to pursue the highest order of being, and that, I really liked that thematic element in the book. And just, that's everything Picard is stood against, right? In the Federation and at their best, Starfleet at their best. And I liked that dichotomy.
Yeah, we were, and another one of our talks was, we were trying to avoid the big bad being, a villain, a true villain, a villain in the true sense of, they're malevolent. They are, they twirl mustaches. They're evil. They want to, they're dominating the world for their ego or whatever. It's different when it's just basically a personification of a natural drive. That's all they're doing. It's not motivated by any particular thoughts one way or the other about who might be impacted. It's just they're in the way, basically. They're just moving. Lean into that. Or hold on to that thought when you read book 2 and book 3. It's an interesting theme that we try to thread through there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that was really interesting, obviously, is that, the loose ends that you have, and specifically you were able to tie into, obviously, a big kind of like hanging Chad from Headlong Flight, where you begin to answer the question of, what Tarek had seen and what was kept hidden. And did you know back then at all that what you were trying to do and that it was going to have anything to do with this series, or were you just kind of trying to set something up at that point with Headlong Flight?
I would like to be able to tell you that I had this whole thing planned out years ago and I knew we were going to be here with this book, but that would be a bold-faced lie. I had other ideas in mind for what Tarek saw. I had several different options that I could explore depending on how the books were going to go, bearing in mind that I was not the only person contributing to these books. So I had a couple of ideas. I don't know that I really dug in on any of them too much, or I didn't get so invested in the idea that I hated to see it go. I just had some ideas. And of course, one of them was possibly, how do we deal with the supernova from Star Trek 2009 and its aftermath? That was obviously something that we were thinking about, even though at the time that I did that with Armageddon's Arrow, we were not allowed to do anything that could be deemed as crossing the streams between the prime timeline and the JJ movies. We were not allowed to do anything like that. So it was always something we had to push down the road a little bit in the hopes that at some point they would change their minds. And then Picard came along. The show came along, and they kind of retconned a little bit the nature of the supernova and what it did, and how it impacted Starfleet and the Federation leading up to the event. So that kind of took that chip off the table. However, once we started putting things together and we realized what was on the board, we did joke that, if we do this right, people are going to think we had this planned out years ago. And of course, that's absolutely not true. We just adapted to what was thrown our way.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the things that in many ways, you guys always did leave yourselves those breadcrumbs to be able to pick up on. And it was, they were always innocuous enough in the sense that you could take them different directions and still have it really work. And, that just, I think, is really smart as authors trying to give yourselves places to go. But yeah, I loved that, with Armageddon's Arrow and Headlong Flight, you were using those pieces, and especially, obviously with Headlong Flight, using that alternate universe with, allowing that to be a place where, Wesley really gets a chance to kind of start to figure something out. And so, which brings me to, I think something that's really interesting is that redeeming Wesley in some ways. A character who's been the butt of more jokes than any other Star Trek character, I think. And yet here, he's very key to the story. Like, he may be the key to the story. We don't know just yet, but can you just talk a little bit about his addition here and kind of using him in that way?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we were looking for redemption for the character so much. I mean, I don't, it's just that he seemed like a natural character to include in this based on his, traveler background. I mean, and he's shown up periodically in some of the novels. He showed up in the Time 2 books, and he was in the Cold Equations trilogy. And I think he may have popped up here and there in a couple of other places, but I'm blanking. So the idea that he would be a part of this was something that we hit on pretty early on in our planning. The nature of his role and how it could, conceivably be morphed into him having fought this battle for, hundreds of years subjectively from his point of view, because of the way he can move through time and space, was an interesting notion to play with. And just like, so if you've read the book, you know that there are a couple of different versions of Wesley, in my book.
Yep. And
so you will see more of that kind of thing in the other books. Jim leans really hard into it. Actually, that's as close to a spoiler as I'm going to get. Is if you liked Wesley in book 1, or even if you didn't like Wesley in book 1, be prepared to see more Wesley in book 2. Yeah, it was felt fun. And, if even if people don't particularly care for the character of Wesley Crusher, I think fan consensus is that Will Wheaton is a pretty cool cat. And so if this had been shown on film, if this had been shot on film, the idea of bringing him in to play this role on film was kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, obviously I love the whole older Wesley character, and there's some Doctor Who elements in there. It also kind of reminded me of, the Galadriel quote in The Lord of the Rings about the long defeat, this battle that just has been raging for a long, long time. And you may eventually lose, but it's the battle is still important, and all of those type of things. So I really enjoyed the two different versions of the character, and especially the way, our quote unquote younger Wesley is let on a journey by the older Wesley to try and fix the mistakes he couldn't fix, and do this right, hopefully. And all of that was fascinating. And again, you're playing with time. And so you have nothing but time to bring in characters from all these different universes in the same way that, again, like a Crisis on Infinite Earths, where you can play with characters from a myriad of universes. Maybe a mirror universe may even show up, who knows? But, you have it all at your fingertips to play with, and why not, really, at this point?
It's funny you bring up Doctor Who, because at least for me personally, I don't know that Dave or Jim, well, maybe, it's possible, but in my head, I was playing with the old man Wesley. In fact, I think I even called him Old Man Wesley in my outline. And then, my thinking of it was, it's very similar to the War Doctor from Doctor Who.
Yes.
And not just in isolation, but also, there are elements of what the Doctor may have done during the Time War with the Daleks. And you see a hint of that in Christopher Eccleston's one go at Doctor in the Dalek episode. And then you see the other stuff with the Day of the Doctor. And those are all, episodes of the different series there that I really enjoyed. I'm not saying we took a page from them, but they were definite inspirations.
Sure.
I mean, perhaps even less so than the whole. I see Crisis on Infinite Treks bandied about, but I want to say it's probably a little bit more the other way. Doctor Who and the other examples, and even maybe a little bit of Avengers. I mean, people were saying this is Star Trek's Avengers Endgame, and I'm like, well, there's perhaps with the size of the scale of the threat, perhaps, but yeah, I mean, there were a number of things running around in our heads while we were trying to put this thing together.
Well, and I think, it's hard for all of that not to be an inspiration, right? I mean, we're talking about time travel and there are so many different ways that it's been done. And so I don't think there's anything wrong anyway with taking bits and pieces from all the little things that we love about the best time travel stories and utilizing them, especially if they help you tell a great story here with, the end of the lit verse as we know it. And I don't know if I feel fine, but, so, yeah, one of the things I was, also struck by and I thought was really beautiful was the way in which Picard is shown his impact on the Federation and Starfleet, and the ways in which his leadership has gone to continue his line, basically, much like a father would with his children. And Picard never wanted to be a father, but of course he is a father in this book and has become one, and he's able to, because of some pushing to help see, he really has had an enormous impact with the way the Federation and Starfleet have gone throughout his life, just because of who he is. And the way in which those that he's trained have then gone on to do great things, and carry on basically the Picard family name without actually having the Picard family name. And Picard's lineage like that, I really loved that being portrayed here, because obviously that's kind of an important part of the series Picard. And I just thought it was really beautiful here because he truly has had such a massive impact.
Thank you. That's probably a little bit of my military mindset bleeding in around the edges of the story, because I've always believed that the true impact of any effective leader is the quality and performance of the people they lead. So if you've done your job right as a leader, to develop those subordinates, you're no longer the most vital cog in that machine. They can carry on without you. They can accomplish the mission if you're not there. They can step up and fill the hole that you might leave behind for any number of reasons. So that's my thinking on Picard as a mentor and a leader and a developer of I apologize for the pun, the next generation of Starfleet officers. So I'm glad that came through. I always felt that was a part of his character that kind of got short-sheeted on TV. You saw glimpses of it every once in a while, but I think we've not just me alone, but I mean, several authors have tried to develop that aspect of his character, that he's more than just a captain. He's a mentor. He's someone who, pushes those, elevates those around him, or as the subordinates around him to do better, to do their best.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing we all love about our favorite captains in Star Trek, and the way that I think I love the way you said they elevate those around them. You think of the way Archer does that. You think of the way Kirk does that, and Picard and Sisko and Janeway, and they all have their own ways of doing that. And yet each of them, in their own way, makes the people around them better. And Picard has been at this so long. I just loved the moment to be able to reflect before everything hits the fan, that you've had this massive impact on, and it's not just obviously characters like Worf, but Teresa Chen and those type of characters to which the books had introduced and given us a chance to see grow because of his influence. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember as well. And one of the things I came away thinking of, as I get older, like, what is the impact I'm having on those around me? And is it a positive impact or is it a negative impact? And I thought, that's a beautiful theme here, because as we think about the idea of time's predator coming for everyone here in this story, or Soren saying time is the fire which we burn, Picard's thought of, it's what we leave behind that matters. It's how we've lived that makes all the difference. And that really, I think, to me, came through in this book. And I think it was a nice moment to sit back and reflect for myself as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it that way because the first time that I got way back when Margaret Clark asked me to write one of the Typhon Pack books, and it was going to be the first book after his and Beverly's son is born. So I wasn't involved in any of the post-novel continuity for DS9 or Next Gen until the Typhon Pack books. So, and by then they had made the decision that, Beverly's going to get pregnant and she and Picard are going to have a kid together, and they're still going to be on the Enterprise and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I had to do was basically write Picard as a new father. And
Paths of Disharmony, right?
Paths of
Because we
Disharmony.
just covered that, which is a great book, by the way.
Thank you very much. But at the time, I was a relatively new father. My oldest kid had not even turned 4, I think. So, I had 2 toddlers, and I'm trying to figure out in my own life, how do I balance all of this? And how do I set a good example? How am I going to set a good example for my children? And how am I going to do right by them, so that they can, shine after I'm gone? So yeah, it's an interesting parallel because that's kind of been how I've been writing Picard all along, is how he finds that balance between being an officer and a leader and a father and a husband at the same time. It's a tricky balance to walk.
And I mean, to me too, I've always loved the fact that you finally allowed him to get married and have the family with Beverly and find that happiness. But in many ways, I've always found that him being a father has actually made him a better captain. It's made him a better man in so many ways. And I think that's probably a reflection of so many of you, like yourself, seeing that probably happen in your own lives and then being able to put that into a character like Picard. That there was so much that he had been disconnected from by keeping himself separate. And I loved he even has that conversation in the book. He wishes that he hadn't spent so much time separately, but at the same time, that taught him something as well. So like he takes what he can get from every single part of his life, and he's using it to make himself not only a better person, but he's also using it to make those around him better. And that, it's not so much regret as much as it is like, okay, what can I learn from that part of my life, and how can I use it then to make different choices now?
That's been pretty much my thinking for him for all the books that I have been. I have to do a quick tally. 6 or 7 of them I've written in the post novel or the post film continuity. So it's unfortunately there was a series there where they all just seemed we didn't get to advance the calendar much. So it seemed like there was a lot going on within one calendar year. But yeah, every time I came at it, I tried to come at it from a little bit different perspective. It's like, okay, and you hit on it. How do you balance all that? How does being, a good and effective officer make you a better parent or a husband, and vice versa? How do those two things make you better? I mean, and there's a great line in a movie called We Were Soldiers. It's that Mel Gibson movie that's set in Vietnam. And he is talking to one of his young lieutenants, and the lieutenant asks him, hey, what do you think about being a soldier and a father? And Gibson's character, Hal Moore, replies, I hope that being good at the one makes me better at the other. So that's one of those lines that kind of sticks in your head. And in situations like writing Picard, where he has to balance all these things, I try to lean into that.
Yeah, that is, I did love that. And it also kind of reminds me of the idea of like, who's happy at the beginning of this book, like there's kind of that gut punch because so many of these characters, their lives are finally getting back to normal, right before we, throw them into the worst situation they've ever seen. And with that part of the book, was that a little bit of almost your wishful thinking of like, if the Litverse could continue, this is where I'd like to see all of these characters be able to go before I rip it all away from him?
Pretty much. It was sort of a pie-eyed dream about where we could have taken the characters. I mean, I can't speak that I had any definite plans for any of them before we had to sit down and figure out this book. Or this series. But you're pretty close to the mark. It'd be nice to see how they could grow, how we could move them along. give that moment of reflection about what could have been, what might have been, before we tear it all apart. It also adds a little bit of a human element. I mean, not to disparage any of the non-human characters, but it adds a little bit of humanity to the situation before we get on the roller coaster ride of the main narrative, to kind of take a pause and see where we are with these characters, because so much has happened in the books in such a very brief span of time. If you actually lay it down and look at it, it just seems like we don't have a chance to breathe and just be with these characters for a little bit before we put them through their paces yet again. And for me, it could very well be the last time I get to write these versions of the characters, because we don't know what comes next, and you don't know what comes next in book 2 and 3. So who knows? So
it's true.
It's just, it's just a different, just kind of moving the pieces into position before we start, swiping at the game board, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just tossing it.
Okay. They're all I want now. Now smack the board. Yeah.
Well, and that is one of those questions too, like with who lives and who dies. And, obviously you mentioned there are a lot of people that end up dying in here, in the book, or do they die? I mean, that's really, I think, a question. But I mean, I tweeted at you. I was like, damn you, Dayton Ward, damn you. Because, for me, Ezri Dax is one of my all-time favorite characters in Star Trek. And I just, that hit me so hard when she died, because I was like, you're taking Dax away? Please let her return somehow in like book 2 and 3, at least so I can spend some more time with her, because I love that character.
I guess we're at the point where we're into spoiler territory for book 1.
Oh yeah. We
didn't even stop
that we
for
haven't
a
been
spoiler
there.
warning.
Yeah, but
I was going to say, it was it was an interest for me. It was very interesting because I have never done that with any of the canon characters. I had no particular desire to do that before, and. You still have to read books 2 and 3. So I'm not defining anything. You never know. You never know what's going to happen. Could get worse, could get better. We don't know. But given the type of threat they were facing, we all agreed that we really need to land some solid punches early on to demonstrate that we're not screwing around here. This is serious. But as far as how things progress in books 2 and 3, you're just going to have to read and see what happens.
Well, I mean, because you did the same thing with Teresa too. I mean, who's been a fan favorite since she was introduced. Actually,
she's probably. I mean, there's no probably. She's my favorite of the the relaunch characters that were created for the books. For the Enterprise crew. I loved playing her off Picard. I have always loved playing her off Picard in particular, the dynamic that they have. It's been one of my favorite things about writing these books. I don't know that he sees her as the way he used to be. I just think he sees the potential that's, once you get past the facade, there's a lot of potential there. And again, there's also that mentoring relationship, and that not quite a father-daughter relationship, but there's definitely a mentor relationship there. I used to tell people in other interviews that I equated their relationship earlier on with the way that Jethro Gibbs and Abby Shuto from NCIS used to play off each other. He was very tolerant of her rather unorthodox methodology and way of doing things, and in a way that he was not with the other characters. He was very indulgent with her because she was definitely, atypical. And yet he had a soft spot for her, in a way that he was, like I said, he was very tolerant and indulgent of her antics, the way that he would not be if it was one of the other characters. And I also attributed that to, like we talked about earlier, Picard is getting older. He's mellowing. Being a father has changed his outlook on how he approaches his relationships with his officers and the rest of the crew. So I don't know. That was just always my take on their relationship.
Well, and I for you, like a Guardian on the Edge of Forever, getting destroyed, and like Tarek dying, and like future Wesley, and all of, learning that whole timelines are gone. Like the Headlong Flight Enterprise D crew or the Relativity crew, and like putting all that together, what was the hardest one for you to kill? Was it Teresa? At least as far as we know in this book, was that the hardest one for you to write, or was there another one that really got to you?
Well, I mean, it was obviously Ezri Dax was a tough one because that was a canon character, and we don't know what the fates are of anybody in any of these books. I mean, you don't know what the fates are based on the books that are still coming. I think everybody just assumed that we would dispense with a lot of the newly created non-canon characters. So the decision to go with Ezri in my book was a tough one because, it's, again, very, very popular character with the fans. But for me personally, the Chen death was a tough one to go.
I thought it was interesting because Rangea, this is maybe one of those things where it's like there's something wrong with the timeline, but didn't he already die?
Did he now?
Yeah, that's the question. I love that though, because that was one of those things where we learn that this universe has been corrupted, and that's the whole crux of the issue. Like, so some characters we see or don't see, or like, will they come back? Like, I just love that there's all this ambiguity right now, and it just gives us so much to play with, and until we get to those next books, and see how it all is finally finished. I love that it's not so cut and dry at the moment.
That's the idea. Like I said, I joke about it. I'm the lowest level intensity setting, I think, but I think you'll agree with me in a month or so when you've had a chance to read book 2 that the ride is moving at full speed. By the time you get done with Jim's book,
ramming speed.
There is just so much going on, and there are facets to this story that have not even been hinted at that you will see in books 2 and 3. There are just entire facets and other angles coming at you in the other books that are just, it's mind-boggling how many moving parts there are in the story. And it's amazing that we were able to do what we could do in these 3 books. It's funny, the original plan that we had hoped for, the big dream project, was that there would have been more books to this. We had planned for at least 4 what I called core books. So we were hoping another writer would join us. And I think we had our hearts set on Una McCormick being part of the fun. But her schedule did not allow for that. And then the other thing that I had put forth as an idea was that we would do a couple of setup books where they would present themselves as, standard Next Generation or DS9 adventures. But by the time you started reading the actual core books, you realized we had already moved pieces in, onto the board without you realizing it. It was sort of like a stealth prequel, And so we had grand plans that didn't work out, but that's the way that goes.
I guess that just fascinates me because I was just thinking about, the way in which obviously, the Vidians are all after, these characters to which, can have an influence on time. Mm-hmm. And so it makes so much sense that, obviously Cisco and then most likely, Kira and the Prophets are going to have a big part in some part of these books because they have such an influence on time, obviously, because they engineer the coming of the emissary through time, which is always a fun time conundrum in the first place. So yeah, it just makes it so much fun. And I think, I have seen some people get so kind of down on the fact that so many people are dying and all, but to me, it is more about the way in which you guys are just getting to play with the universe in a way that you've never gotten to before. And in doing so, it's also bringing to an end and opening the door for something else. And I guess I'm just excited about the ride that we're going to get to go on and to see where everything ends up. And, I think CBS also offered you guys the opportunity to do this. And it does seem like it's not just about closing a bunch of doors, it's about opening some doors as well. And what I'm excited about is what doors are going to be open when we leave this continuity.
To boil down, what you're driving at is, I don't view this as a reset. I don't necessarily view it as an ending. I view it as a turning point and a transition. It's the sort of thing that tie-in literature or tie-in media has always done when there is a property that's actively producing new content for the screen. Star Trek is not even the first time that Star Trek's done it.
Right.
What's different, I think, is very similar to what affected Star Wars, is that there was such a large span of time where there was just nothing being put on screen. And so the expanded media had, greater reign to play. The sandbox was bigger. But now that they're back doing Star Wars movies and they're doing Star Trek, projects, the stuff that I write, the stuff that we write, the tie-in media has to support that. And that being said, CBS was very excited about what we had proposed and how we wanted to treat it. They were always in our corner. In fact, that their mandate, along with our editors at Simon & Schuster, was basically, go for it, swing for the fences. Let's see what you got. So I think it's unprecedented in the fact that Star Trek went for so long with this uninterrupted, evolving and expanding continuity that was allowed to, create or be created. That's what's probably making people take stock of, wow, I can't believe they let them do that for all those years. That's unusual. I think Star Wars is probably the only other property that's had that kind of freedom for that kind of time. But even then, I think Star Wars leash was a little tighter than Star Trek's in terms of what they could do in the books. I think it was always a question of when, not if there was going to be new Star Wars movies.
Yeah. When I think about, the impact on, Deep Space Nine started it all, and Deep Space Nine was always my favorite. And then just where all the characters ended up, that's absolutely, I think, correct in just what you guys were able to do. And I think the question that I'm wondering, and this is obviously not a question I've really ever asked an author, but how are you feeling? With all, just because this is such a momentous moment, and how are you feeling now that your book is out, and at least for right now, until we figure out where it's going, this is it with this part of the universe?
Tired. It's been a long time coming. We've been working on this thing for if you really go all the way back to the very, very beginning when we first started sketching notes out, it's well over 2 years that we started talking about the possibility of something like this. And then, pretty well a 2-year window where we started talking for real. So after all of that, I'm kind of relieved that it's on the shelves and it's out there. And I'm excited for books 2 and 3 because I really just, while we were reviewing each other's manuscripts, I had to joke once in a while to Dave and Jim that I got so caught up in what they had written that I had forgotten to, make notes. I had to go back and reread because I'm like, you guys just sucked me so far into the storyline. I forgot to do my job and make sure that everything was syncing up and, we weren't out of step with each other. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch the reactions. Fun is probably not the right word because it's not like I'm gleefully excited about, some of the stuff we're going to put you all through. But it's satisfying to see this all finally come together and finally get put in y'all's hands so that you can read it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just even think I love the fact that these are in, trade paperback form too. It just even feels more exciting. I hate mass market paperbacks, just personally. So I love that they've moved to the trade paperbacks and just holding it in my hands, and obviously having been a fan, I remember picking up Avatar, and it just... It has been obviously such a part of my life and with literary treks, and it's just this is a moment for us as well as the fans, and it's just great to be a part of it with y'all, and I am excited to see what comes next. And so as always though, I want to give you the platform. Where can people find you? Is there anything else that you've got coming out they need to be looking for? What else are you up to these days besides, ending a Star Trek universe? The little things.
The little things. Well, you can always find me at DaytonWard.com. That's where my home base is, and you'll find a blog there that I tend to at irregular intervals, and then links to social media. You can ask me questions via any of those conduits anytime. And I'm happy to, if I can't answer it, I can fake it, or I can at least point you in the direction of somebody who's smarter than I am. No shortage of those people. What am I up to these days? Well, I'm still doing my consulting work with CBS or Viacom Consumer Products, Viacom CBS Consumer Products. I'm consulting on a variety of things dealing with extending the narrative. So, books and comics and games and interactive experiences and anything that it can extend the storytelling for Star Trek into other spaces besides on screen. I'm still writing on stuff. I just recently helped with a project for Modiphius for their Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. It's just now coming out. It's an entire campaign setting that we created called the Shackleton Expanse, and it's a hefty 360 odd page hardcover book that you could probably kill somebody with if you swung hard enough. I have a few other things in the fire. I've been doing some short story writing with my writing partner, Kevin Dillmore. We've been having a lot of fun doing non-Star Trek stuff for different anthologies. Just recently finished writing a space Western with him that is currently with its editor getting pounded. We have a couple more of those in the hopper. And I have a couple of the projects that I've not been able to announce as far as what they are or who they're with, but stay tuned. I always have something going.
Yeah, that's great, man. And I'm definitely excited to see, what doors this will open for all of you as well as we move forward. Obviously, they're still writing, books within, Picard and Discovery. Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll have Strange New Worlds coming out for you guys, yep. I'm sure, to be able to play with as well. And who knows what will happen with the series is, whether it's Enterprise, Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, the original series, Voyager, inside those series as well. Who knows what's going to happen there? So, I mean, there's so much still there.
I just can't imagine a world without new original series novels. I just can't imagine that we've seen the end of those. It just seems like it would be weird. I mean, I've been buying original series novels since they were, 95 cents or $1.25 cover price. So, I go back quite a ways, longer than I care to admit out loud. So the other series, there's always a potential there, whether it's comics or games or novels. I mean, I think Star Trek and its different flavors is evergreen. Mm-hmm. I think as long as there's going to be Star Trek, there's going to be Star Trek novels of some kind.
Now if we could just get like Lower Decks novels,
I wonder if a Lower Decks novel would be the literary equivalent of a Saturday Night Live sketch. It's like it overplays the joke and it stays too long. It's like I love Saturday Night Live, but how those sketches sometimes can drag on past the point of being uncomfortable.
I can understand.
I wonder if Lower Decks is that kind of animal where a conventional novel
that's a good point. It might work better in a comic setting, I would think. It
might work better in a comic, or if we can find some way to flip shift that, just to flip that idea on its head. I really don't know how you approach a Lower Decks novel.
That's a good point.
I guess if John Scalzi wanted to write a Star Trek novel, it would work that way for him. I know he already wrote kind of sort of a Star Trek novel.
Yeah, red shirts. Yeah,
red shirts.
Yep.
Yeah, and Prodigy, which is another animated series that's going to be aimed at a younger demographic. I think there's a lot of potential for that one. It's animated, but it's not at all like Lower Decks. It's a completely different animal. And I love it for the fact that you can watch this show and you don't need to know anything about Star Trek. It's a perfect on-ramp for the kids and those who are still kids at heart. I think it's just going to learn about Star Trek the way the characters do as the stories unfold. And they're going to just show you the Starfleet ethos and just, I don't know. It's just, it's a great idea for a show. I mean, when I first heard about it, I was very skeptical, and I got to read the scripts, and I was blown away by what they were trying to accomplish. If it comes across half as well on screen as it does on the page, you're going to love it. That's
great. And I'm excited for what comes next. Who knows what's going to happen. And as always, thank you so much. All the years that, you've been a part of Literary Treks, obviously, helping make it a success by coming to talk about the books that you've written. And I just so appreciate it. I never want to take for granted the time that you give us. And again, it means a lot to me personally, obviously, but I just really thank you from the bottom of my heart for pouring your heart into all of this for so many years. And so, yeah, man, thanks for coming on.
No, thanks for having me, man. It's always fun talking to you.
Well, you know what, Matt? It's bittersweet. I mean, we're beginning the end with all this, and I'm excited that we got these other 2 books coming to follow up with this one. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's the end, right? So yeah, I don't know how I feel, but I am really excited.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Bruce. This is really difficult for me to be here in the sense of, in all honesty, it's been one of the few things in Star Trek that I have really loved over the last 20 years. That has really kept me going. I actually was a big fan of the JJ verse movies. Surprisingly enough, nobody was more surprised than myself that was the case. But this, I can't believe we're wrapping it up, and it does hurt my heart. There are many places, as I talked with Dayton, where this book tore my heart out, and it's like Dayton took my heart, stomped on it, sat on it, put some nails in it, tore it up, spit it out, and left it on the side of the freeway for dead. So I have no idea.
This surprises you? Dayton does that all the time, right?
I know. But I just know that, of course, we've got James Swallow left. And then, of course, David Mack is going to take what's left of my heart, put it in a blender and drink it for fun. So
he'll be ruthless.
Yes. But Bruce, if anybody does want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. That's Admiral with the underline Rex. You can also find me on Goodreads. I should mention that more often, but I am there. And of course, in our Goodreads group of Literary Treks. But I'm also on the podcast of Positively Trek, where we talk all things Star Trek, including books and comics and episodes and such. And also the Star Wars Report podcast, which I like to say it's its last season. So we're ending the show in May, and we'll see what happens after that.
And, of course, you can find me here all over the network, especially with the 602 Club, talking about all of the fandoms we love, not just one. And, of course, inside that feed, we've also got Snyder Cuts as well as Assembling Avengers bonus shows. So don't miss those, especially since Assembling Avengers just began, as John Mills and I are talking about all of the Marvel films together and kind of reassessing those as we move forward. And by the time this show comes out, we'll have reached film 2 in phase 1 with The Incredible Hulk. You can also find me doing The Orb as well as Warp 5 here. The Orb, of course, about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Warp 5, Chris Jones and I are celebrating 20 years of Enterprise as we walk through every single show that
I listened to that recent episode of the pilot. That was a really good episode.
Thank you so much. I'm enjoying it so much because I really do love Enterprise, and I hope that shines, honestly, as we walk through that series and look back on it. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing 2 shows. One was Owl Post with Drea Kaufman. That is a completed show. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, and Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. And, of course, on social media, you can find me all over the place under Matt Rushing 02. But of course, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time,
live long
and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.